We talk all the time about disclosure, and we throw this word around. And if you talk to different people, they have different expectations of what disclosure is. What is disclosure for you, Nick?
For me, I think it's the hard facts of truth. I think, disclosure is revealing the truth and nothing but the truth. It takes no political view, it takes no personal view. It is just the hard, raw truth, I suppose. And I think at the end of the day, there are two types of truths. There's the truth that are the hard facts, and there's the truth that people want to believe. There's your own truth, and then there's the actual truth. And I think disclosure for a lot of people means a bit of both. I think everyone wants to have their own truths revealed to them, or kind of in a more kind of like I was right kind of thing. I knew this fact, or this conspiracy theory, or whatever it is, was the truth. And then there's revealing the more, what I suppose a term that gets used a lot is the ontological shock. The actual hardcore fact truth, which will blow your mind in a way where you might suffer from it. In a sense, not everyone's ready for that level of truth. So I think disclosure for me would always be more of the ontological shock. I don't care about the truths that I think are right, because I don't know if they're right or not. I just want the hard facts. But I think a lot of people are more comfortable with their own truths being right, and kind of shying away from the more ontological shock, I suppose. As everyone's got different capabilities and different kind of views on the world and different feelings. It can be a very tricky thing to get right, in terms of balancing how do you disclose something which a lot of people might not be ready for. Um, but also, how do you disclose something where everyone might actually think it's not real, but it is? It's there's one thing telling the people it's true, and disclosing the truth, and then there's other people actually believing it. And in the world of misinformation, in so many different areas, and the world of AI generation, how can you ever know what the actual disclosure is? Yeah, I suppose that's one way I can put it.
I think you bring up a great point with, a lot of us are very aware of it because of AI today. But we also don't really get too deep into the fact of what can we know as individuals and as a society, vice what we're told. And y- to me, even though the idea of disclosure doesn't just for me hold one piece, like are aliens real or is there life out there? I think it's more nuanced and multi-layered. But the fact is just like so many other things, we're taking them for granted. And this is not me opening a can of worms of conspiracy theory. But the fact is we don't, as individuals, know if these things are verified or true. We're going to end up taking somebody's word for it. Do you think that the reason that we've shied away from disclosure as a in the West, let's say, as a generalized society, is that because of the direct implications on so many other facets of life? Like they couldn't disclose one specific category as being real and having valid study without it opening the door for numerous other studies and shaking people's perhaps faith in their religions or science, etc. I think for a lot of people that discuss this topic, they're generally more open-minded when it comes to things surrounding religion or spirituality. And so they might be open to something that doesn't exactly match the scripture they were taught or raised with. But for a great number of people out there, as we've seen with the demographic surrounding building Nanu,
Hmm.
that's not the whole world. The whole world is not open-minded. Um, where do you think do you think the problem lies specifically there in the cascade of implications, or do you think it's it's based in something else? Is it lack of data? Is it
Yeah, I mean, we touched on it the first episode. I think there's so much data flying around now; it's almost too much data flying around. Um, Conformity is an issue. I think when most of the world is conforming to a certain way of life and a certain belief of life, that brings a level of kind of, I don't want to say closed mindedness because that's kind of more of a negative word, but a way of life that isn't aware of other things going on. I think people who are kind of in the blurry lines or the more kind of spiritualized side of things, I think they're definitely more open to new ideas and new thoughts and new feelings. Whereas, people that conform to certain beliefs or views, in the more mainstream beliefs, I should say, it's much more, I mean, that is very alien to them. That is taking something in their own world, in their own universe, and bringing something new into it. And, for a lot of people, they can't even, let alone comprehend it, they can't even like think about that happening, because their day to day life, none of this is even a thought in their head. Whereas the people who are more open minded or more connected with all the different types of phenomena, I think are more open to other levels of disclosure. In the sense where if you're more into the paranormal or the cryptozoology side of things, you might be more open to UAP disclosure. If you're more open to UAP disclosure, you might be more open to ancient myths, coming true. Whereas I think if you're you're following down one of the more kind of stricter beliefs in society, then it's going to be very hard to open those doors to a different worldview. And I think that's where high levels worth of disclosure and ontological shock could happen. Now, I think the world is definitely in a better place to accept any new discoveries. I think, weirdly, I think one thing that actually has helped is technology. It has brought in so much information to us. Whereas before we were all kind of very closed off, and we'd learn new things through stories or books or radio or TV shows. Whereas now we can kind of consume any bit of information, to be honest. So yeah, I think there is still quite a long way to go in the grand scheme of the whole world being open minded to disclosure. And it also depends on what type of disclosure we're talking about. As you said, there's on Nano, there's many different categories we follow. Is it paranormal disclosure? Are ghosts living? Well, I say living. Are they entities? Did they exist before? If ghosts were proven to be real, then that would change many worldviews. Or could it be something as simple as Bigfoot being real? That would change a lot of opinions about our history as Homo sapiens growing up. Or it could be something as in the kind of more natural phenomenal world where ball lightning, which is incredibly rare, has effects that we never thought electricity could have. There could be so many different levels of disclosure from so many different areas. But if we're talking about what a lot of people do want, and I think it's more towards the UAP kind of alien NHI phenomena, where have we been visited? Do the government know about it? Kind of deal. Have they been working with them? I think that's what a lot of people want to hear from the government in terms of disclosure. But what happens if it turns out it's nothing to do with that and it's something completely different? We until we hear the news or the disclosure, there could be many possibilities. We could be going down the wrong rabbit hole, we could be going down the right rabbit hole, or something slightly in between. But whatever disclosure looks like for me or the rest of the world, it will be I want to say history making, but everything's history making. Yeah, every little thing changes history and adds to history. So yeah, it'll. God, yeah, it's a very, very interesting thought to see how the whole world would react to something as big as we are not alone in the universe. Or it'd be very
Yeah.
interesting to see, oh, ghosts and spirits are real. That would change a whole perspective on everything. So I just, yeah, I'm interested to see the after effects and the domino effect that it will cause, because people have a lot of herd mentality, and I suppose it's depending on where that herd heads. If it's a positive thing or if it's a negative thing, I suppose is going to be the real telltale sign of how disclosure does hit the mainstream of the world population.
I was raised on, you know, for me personally, I chose rock and roll. I chose punk music. I had a really anti-authoritarian kind of attitude growing up, but in a modern sense, where I was kind of ahead of Rage Against the Machine. In my own beliefs, I didn't wait for them to come out and tell me how
No.
to view the government and how to view authority structures. That said, I personally can't help but look at this subject through the eyes of power and control. And when we talk about aspects of consciousness and things that have been, quote unquote, proven in physics in the last 20 years, which is pretty incredible considering where the knowledge of where we're at is for most people. We've surpassed that by a great
Mm,
deal beyond what the normal everyday considerations of the average man are of physics and science. Um, all of these things, whether it's disclosure of NHI, disclosure of the nature of consciousness or reality, or even the ways in which you can cheat the system and or manipulate this reality or consciousness, those things all revolve around if you know you have power and control, and if you don't know, you lack that. And for me, at the end of the day, I can't help not seeing that as the biggest and first hurdle that we have to cross. How, granted, we're talking now about how to make a perfect world, how to decentralize secrets, and things like that. But we've gotten to this point. How do we invigorate a voting base that isn't even aware of a problem,
mm,
that doesn't know that information is being withheld from them? And some of them, if given a chance to see that
mm,
information, might not want to see it, might
mm,
not be prepared to have their paradigm changed and to have their views shaken. Um, it seems insurmountable sometimes, but at the same time, I have not been able to quit. I can't stop caring, no matter how ambivalent or angry I might get around aspects of how disclosure goes and how governments and bodies respond to it. I still think it's the most important thing that there can be to give people a sense of what this is
mm.
and what they're experiencing. I guess what I'm asking is how do we save the world? But what fires off in your brain when I bring that stuff up?
Well, assuming Superman doesn't crash down anytime soon, I think, how do we save the world? Or how do we at least make sure humanity head in the right direction? I think for me, the issue with humanity at the moment, has kind of always been an issue, is there's no common goal. Every government, most individuals, most groups are doing their own thing. And there's nothing wrong with that in the micro level of a living species. But you look at all of the majority of insects with colonies, they all have a common goal. It's to protect the queen or grow the colony or look for food. And they just do that perfectly. They'll non-stop do that. Whereas now there are so many distractions. And that's if you just look at one country. There's political distractions, there's entertainment distractions, there's the global economy distraction, which everyone is connected with. There's your neighboring countries distractions. Um, there are so many distractions in the world. I think one way to really save humanity or make sure it does head in the right direction is to find a common goal that everyone can work towards, that everyone can contribute to. Because at the moment, there's not much going on in that whole worldview. Everyone's kind of in it for themselves. Every nation's in it for themselves. Like everyone's greedy. But unfortunately, humanity is way too greedy. So I would like humanity to find a common goal. What that could be, I mean, curing all diseases and famine, that would be great. Stopping all wars, that would be great. Venturing off into the solar system to find more resources to spread us out more, that would be great. And then you look at the more pessimistic side of things. A world ending natural disaster would bring humanity together, unfortunately. It would really separate humanity in the good way and the bad way. The greedy people would be incredibly greedy in that scenario, and the good people will be incredibly good. Now, we can't ever predict when a natural disasters happen, so we can't work towards that. And to be fair, we don't even want a natural disaster to happen to save humanity in the grand scheme of things. So the other thing is like, we've evolved in a way through our unknown history, being very tribal, as being very you against me, and it's still that way. Gone are the days of king and queens. Now it's politicians and dictators. And it's the same whether you're a politician or a dictator to whether you're in primary school or nursery school or kindergarten, and you have your little groups and those kids don't like you, but these kids like you kind of deal. We're still doing things the same, and we haven't really evolved in how we interact with each other. The issue with modern day and society is we kind of interact less, we're less connected. The issue now, which is amplifying, is we're even less connected because most of the things we are consuming aren't even done by humans anymore. They're done by AI. And
We live in a lore. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, and how disconnected do you want to be? And do you want to end up like a great film, which is even a kid's film, but it's Wally? Do we just always sit in chairs consuming content? Is content consuming all we're destined to be? Is that kind of where the human race is heading? And I think it's just an awful waste of time in the grand scheme of things. I think I saw this very powerful quote, speech, whatever you call it, and I can't really remember it well because my memory's terrible with these things, but it's basically you kind of have to live in the day. Tomorrow's dead. Sorry, yesterday's dead. I already got it wrong. Yesterday's dead, and tomorrow doesn't exist yet. So you need to live in the day. And if all you're doing every day is consuming content, then by the time you're on your deathbed, I mean, basically, we're just a shell. We're just robots now. We've lost our ways. And I think that's why a lot of people, and I really understand when people get angry about AI art and AI creation because it's so cold. Just because I spent a few minutes in DALI or ChatGPT creating this poster or this painting, but there's nothing to it because anyone can do it. Whereas, yes, anyone can pick up paints and buy paints and make a canvas, and it might be terrible, but at least there's some effort into that. And I think, yeah.
I've been struggling for years to play various musical instruments. I'm not the best musician in the world. I really enjoy it. Not very technical or educated, even though I've read a lot about it. But I truly enjoy the effort that goes into that. Now, AI, when it first came out, you could, a lot of the gimmicks were apps where you could upload your voice and it would create songs for you on the fly with your voice and things like that. And for people that don't have, I don't want to say talents, but haven't put in the time to learn a certain area or something, AI allows them the ability to immediately kind of put on a costume of what it would feel like to create that content. And much in the way that people cosplay, and go to Comic-Con and things, they'll spend 6-8 months building this amazing giant mech suit, and then they'll go and they'll nothing wrong with it, go get attention for their
Yeah,
effort
yeah, exactly.
and
Yeah.
enjoy themselves. And but those people don't go home thinking that they're Master Chief from a video
No,
game. They
no.
don't believe that. They don't start shooting it
Mm,
at things or blowing things up. It's a pantomime. But I think with AI, for a lot of people, they've put this costume on, and they've begun to think that it's them, that this is an extension of me, and these ideas I'm coming up with, they're from me because I'm the one that prompted this thing. And I think that's incredibly dangerous for our society because it truly has become, you know, a drug of the people, in that you don't even need to be creative anymore. You don't need to put in any effort. The thing that that gentleman spent 20 years honing,
mm,
you know, just how to draw an eye or a hand or to do feet properly, you can do all that right now. You don't need him anymore. And the idea that that is art and that that has soul, to me, is it doesn't. And I think that, you know, we're talking about big problems. We're talking about, you know, as I jokingly said, saving the world. But I find it interesting that we have so many contradictions in human nature, and one of them is the thing that drives greed
mm,
or hoarding is not lack, it's surplus. It's that once you get enough, you now have something you must protect from the others who don't,
mm,
and you have to hold on to that because you worked so hard to accrue it. And at some point, you know, as tribal as we are, that's the exit from no longer caring about the
mm.
tribe. And I think that that has a lot to do with the way that we approach this phenomenon, because what you and I are talking about is this bandwagon that everyone in humanity could recognize and become interested in.
Mm.
And I think that's also the most frightening idea to any power base in the world, is that the entire world could band together behind something and care enough about it to
Yeah.
solve it.
Mm.
So, you know, we are, I'm not going to ask you a big question like how do we inspire humanity to do these things. Obviously that's a, you know,
That's a whole different podcast.
right. But I think what you and I see is that so many of us are involved in this because there's a collective mystery to be solved. And there's an idea that we have a place in that mystery and a part in solving it. And it becomes very, very driving for a lot of people. And I think that that's the kind of thing we're talking about here, that we have to somehow find a way to impart to humanity.
No, no, I completely agree. I think, you know, as I said, it's like finding a common goal. You know, what is our common goal on this podcast, in the business, in Nanu and beyond? You know, it's the mysteries of the universe. And thankfully, I feel like the universe will always have mysteries, you know, in many areas, and especially in our lifetime and our grandkids' lifetime, that they probably won't even be 1% of the way there. But I think it creates a common goal where we can discover things, we can be humans, we can learn, we can work together, we can build community, and where it should hopefully benefit the rest of humanity with discoveries made, you know. Now, obviously, not every discovery is going to be positive. There might be some very negative discoveries, you know, but we deal with that when it comes. You know, we problem solve, and I think swinging it back to slightly to AI, I think that's one thing where we are very dumbing down in our problem solving. Like, we are using AI to code, to, you know, fix errors, to do emails, to fix spelling, you know, all this stuff. All of our problem solving skills are being dissipated into and evaporating. Now, that's fine for our current generations, but when you go 6, 7 generations down and everything's automated and everything's used, like, you know, you're talking about robots doing jobs, you're talking about much more significant levels of AI, you're talking about automation. Like, what do we become? Do we become the people on the Wally chairs just consuming content? Or do we try and venture off and be explorers again and do make discoveries? Yeah, it's a very difficult one to solve because not everyone's interested in that. Some people are just happy to do their 9 to 5, see their family when they get home, and watch some sports. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But how do we, again, as a whole species, and try and save humanity? I think it does come down to a common goal, and it has to be an agnostic common goal, because I think you can get very cultish, you can get very religious if you have a very closed-minded view of that common goal. And we've seen it time and time again with civilizations. If you don't follow my rules, you're out. If you don't do this, we're going to crucify you. If you don't do this, you're dead. And there's different ways of doing it now, because we don't need to kill people. We just need to socially demoralize them, or cast them away, or cancel them, or call them whatever, or make up things. Disinformation, misinformation. So there are much smarter ways to do that now, and to divide people. It's so much easier to divide people, and that's why I think whatever the common goal is to hopefully save humanity one day, it has to be a very agnostic one. It has to be one that anyone can enter, one that anyone can join, and one that can still make us be humans. To create, to problem solve, to build community, to build relationships, to think, to create art, to just be what we're meant to be, and that's a living species. Like, robots are robots; they can do that job pretty well. We don't need to be biological robots. We were not. I say created that way, but I have no idea how we were created. But yeah, we're much more interesting than just being biological robots, I suppose.
I think you bring up some really important points. We have a world full of belief systems. Although many people are, I don't want to say stuck in their own, they are isolated in their belief systems. And a lot of times that makes them unaware that there are even other belief systems. But you're absolutely right in that whatever these solutions are, they have to matter for everybody. They have to cross those boundaries. They have to cross cultural boundaries, and hopefully not moral boundaries. It's always hoped that we share that same generalized set. But I think that what you're doing with Nanu, what we've built there, and what we intend to do in the future is aimed towards that collective goal. Well, we may not have answered all the questions we had today, but I think we did get closer to identifying what some of the problems are. Nick, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to our next conversation. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you for having me.